You know, when you hit your 70s, you think you've seen it all. You think life can't throw much more at you. The kids are grown, the mortgage is paid off, or close enough, and if your husband still remembers to take the trash out without being asked, you call it a win. I thought I had it figured out. 43 years married to the same man, 2 kids, 5 grandbabies, a rose garden, and a Sunday morning routine that included coffee, church, and an early bird special at Denny's. Simple, predictable, safe. Then she moved in next door. Her name was Jolene. I'm not even making that up. Tall, bleach blonde, legs that didn't quit, and a laugh that carried through the walls like a damn car alarm. She was the kind of woman who wore red lipstick to check the mail and pretended not to notice when all the neighborhood men stared like they were 13 again. She was younger than me, much younger, and she made a point of reminding everyone of that without saying a word. Tight jeans, halter tops, and perfume you could smell from 3 lawns away. She waved the day she moved in. I was trimming my hydrangeas, sweat on my forehead, clippers in hand. "Hi there," she said, like we were girlfriends already. I nodded politely, said, "Welcome," and went back to pruning. Something about her put me off from the beginning. It wasn't jealousy. Please. I've lived too long to be jealous of a woman whose entire personality is built on lip gloss and cleavage. No, it was something else. Something in the way she looked past you, like you were only important if you were of use. I noticed my husband started mowing the lawn more often, wearing cologne to do it, which was odd. I'd catch him glancing through the fence slats like a schoolboy spying on a crush. "Just being neighborly," he said when I asked. Neighborly, my foot. Then came the small things. He started spending longer at the grocery store, checking his phone more, getting secretive about bank statements. And Jolene, she'd wave at me with that smug little smirk, like she knew something I didn't. Turns out, she did. They say betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the one who swore they'd love you forever, even when your hands get wrinkled and your hair goes gray. Well, I had wrinkles all right. And apparently, that was enough reason for my husband to start spending his nights next door instead of in our bed. He left on a Tuesday, took his shirts, his golf clubs, and my trust. Moved in with Jolene like it was the damn honeymoon suite. No warning, no apology, just a scribbled note on the kitchen table. "I need something new. Don't try to find me." Don't try to find him? Honey, I wasn't going to. But I was going to take everything. It started slowly, you know. Little things here and there that didn't quite add up. At first I thought I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was age playing tricks on me. The kids said I was overthinking, said I needed to relax. My friends, bless them, tried to reassure me, saying, "Oh, John's a good man. He wouldn't do something like that." But I wasn't blind. You don't live as long as I have without learning to read between the lines. It was the way he started coming home later, then working late more often. Every time I asked him about it, he'd mumble something about deadlines or how he had to meet with clients. A year ago, he didn't even know what a client was. I didn't mind him working hard. He always had. But this was different. This was the kind of busy that didn't come with paychecks. I'd see Jolene walking her dog, stopping to chat with him by the mailbox. At first I thought maybe she just needed a friend, a new neighbor feeling lonely. But soon she was always there, always on that front lawn. Sometimes she'd laugh too loudly, as if trying to get my attention on purpose. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I'd see her standing there in her little shorts, smiling that perfect little smile, all while John leaned in just a little too close. When I confronted him about it, he'd brush me off. "You're imagining things, Nora. You've got too much time on your hands. Relax, have a drink." But that smile of his, it wasn't the same. It wasn't the smile of a man who was comfortable in his own skin anymore. It was forced, nervous even. I could feel it deep in my bones. The worst part was that I started noticing how different he was around me. He became irritated at the smallest things. If I asked him to pass the salt, he'd sigh like I'd asked him to build a house. If I asked him about his day, he'd say something vague like, "Oh, you know, same old, nothing new." But Jolene, she was the new. She was the thing he couldn't get enough of. I started to resent her, no, hate her, and I hadn't even spoken to the woman more than a few times. I told myself I didn't care. I wasn't going to let some woman wreck my peace. But peace was something I couldn't hold on to anymore. One afternoon, as I was sitting on the porch with my tea, I saw him again, John and Jolene, standing in the driveway, talking. The same sickly sweet laughter, his hand on her shoulder. It wasn't just a friendly chat anymore. It wasn't just neighborly. It was something else, something I didn't understand. And that feeling of being left out, that's when I knew. I wasn't imagining things. I don't know when it happened exactly, but there was a shift in the air. It was subtle, like the first gust of wind before a storm, and at first, I couldn't put my finger on it. Jolene's presence in our lives became a whisper I couldn't escape. Everywhere I turned, there she was, on my doorstep, at the grocery store, sitting on my favorite bench at the park. At first, it seemed like coincidence, just two women in a small town running into each other, nothing more. But then I noticed things. The way she would tilt her head when she talked to John, as if listening to something only he could hear. The way her hand would brush his arm, light as a feather, but just long enough to make my stomach churn. One evening, I decided to confront it. It was a Thursday. John was working late, of course. I'd made my favorite dinner, baked a cherry pie, but he didn't come home until after midnight. He didn't even apologize for being so late. Instead, he sat at the table, barely touching his food, staring off into space. His eyes were hollow, like he wasn't there at all. "You're acting strange," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, like I hadn't been stewing in my own hurt for days. He barely looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what's going on with you? What's going on with her?" I leaned forward, my heart pounding. I'd never been the confrontational type, but something in me broke that night. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Nora, you've been drinking too much wine lately. Maybe you should get some rest. Don't you dare change the subject." I stood up and grabbed the bottle of Merlot. I had half a glass left in my hand, and I wasn't in the mood to sip it slowly anymore. I tossed the rest of it back, feeling the warmth of alcohol spread through me, making the room spin a little. But I needed something, anything, to numb the knot tightening in my chest. "Nora, please." He sighed like I was a burden. "You're not seeing things clearly. She's just a neighbor. You know how people get in small towns. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." "Mountain, huh?" I whispered, leaning in, my voice low and dangerous. "I'm not the one who's been spending late nights next door, John. You are." That hit him. His face flushed, his eyes flickered, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a trace of guilt in his expression. "I don't know what you want me to say," he muttered. "I'm not leaving you. He stopped himself, as if he'd caught the words before they tumbled out. But it was too late. I'd seen enough. The way he couldn't meet my eyes anymore. The way his voice cracked, like he was trying to keep the truth from spilling out. "I want you to be honest with me," I said, my voice hard now, like a blade. "Tell me, John, are you sleeping with her?" His face turned white. The silence between us thickened like the fog that used to roll in off the lake at dawn. And in that silence, I knew. I didn't need him to say it out loud. I already knew. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence in the kitchen that night was like nothing I'd ever felt before. It was cold, like a freezer door that had been left open too long, and I stood there, staring at John, waiting for him to give me something, anything. He didn't. He didn't need to say the words. I already knew. The betrayal was thick in the air, the weight of it pressing down on my chest until it was hard to breathe. It wasn't just in his eyes. It was in the way he held himself, the way he couldn't meet my gaze. I could see it, clear as day. He was in love with her. I had spent so many years building a life with him, raising kids, fixing leaky pipes, sharing holidays, anniversaries, and the mundane stuff that people think doesn't matter. And now it felt like it had all been erased. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I'd spent too many years being the strong one, the one who kept it all together when the world seemed to fall apart around us. So I just stood there, holding on to my glass of wine, like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. "John," I said, my voice almost a whisper, "are you happy?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the window, looking out at the darkening sky like it held the answers he was too afraid to give me. The silence stretched out, longer than it should have. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible. "I don't know, Nora. I thought I was. I really did." I laughed, bitter and hollow. "You thought you were? And what? You're going to just leave me here with nothing? With years of memories and promises for what? A woman who wears too much perfume and can't even spell loyalty?" His face twisted with guilt, but he didn't respond. He couldn't. And honestly, I didn't need him to. I took a deep breath, as if I could draw in some strength, but I was already feeling the sting of what was coming. I knew, deep in my gut, that he wasn't coming back. The moment Jolene stepped into our lives, everything changed. She'd taken him piece by piece, without me even realizing it, and now she had him fully, heart, body, and soul. "Go to her," I said, my voice low but steady. "Go to your precious Jolene. I'm done. I'm done pretending I don't know what's been going on." John didn't say anything. He didn't even try to apologize. He just stood there, looking at me with those sad eyes, and then he turned and left. And just like that, my husband was gone. He didn't take a single thing from the house. No bags, no clothes, nothing. He just left with nothing but his shame and his lies. I didn't cry then either. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I wasn't going to show him how much it hurt. Instead, I stood there, in the middle of the kitchen, with that half-empty bottle of wine, and I made a decision. I was done. I was done with the years of pretending, done with the silence, done with everything. I didn't wait long before I did what I had to do. John's things were still where he'd left them, his shirts hanging in the closet, his slippers by the door. It was like he expected to just step back in one day, like nothing had changed, but everything had changed. That night, I sat down at the kitchen table and made a list of everything he owed me, not just money or things, but all the years I'd given him, all the sacrifices, the countless times I had bent myself in half for him, for the family, for the home we built. And now, here I was, with nothing but a few wrinkles and an empty bed. I was done being the woman who waited, the one who forgave, the one who loved too hard and too long, always hoping that one day he'd come back around and see me the way I had seen him. But no. Now, he had gone, and it was time for me to see myself, for the first time in years. I called the lawyer the next day. I didn't need to talk to him long. He'd been my lawyer for years. He knew my situation, knew that I wasn't the type to make a scene. I told him everything about John, about Jolene, about how John had decided to run off with nothing but his pride and his lies. "You're not going to fight me on this, are you?" I asked him, knowing the answer. "No, Nora. We'll get it all settled. Don't worry." I wasn't worried. Not anymore. The next day I marched right over to Jolene's house. I didn't knock. I didn't wait for an invitation. I just walked right in through the front door, past the neatly stacked magazines and the faint smell of cheap air freshener. Jolene was sitting on the couch, flipping through some catalog, like this was all some sort of innocent mistake. Her eyes went wide when she saw me, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. But that passed quickly. I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed, and looked at her. No smile, no pleasantries. "So this is it, huh?" I asked, my voice steady and cold. "You've got him now, my husband, my life, everything I worked for." Jolene's expression faltered, but she quickly composed herself. "Nora, No," I cut her off, taking a step forward. "Don't even try. I'm not here to make nice. I'm here to tell you that you can have him. Have him with all his debts, all his problems, and all the baggage that comes with a man who's already spent 40 years being my problem." She didn't know what to say. Her mouth opened and closed, like she was searching for the right words, but she couldn't find them. "You think you're going to live some glamorous life with him, huh?" I scoffed. "You think he's going to give you everything I gave him? Think again. He's got nothing left. He's got no retirement, no car, no savings. I've already taken it all." Jolene's eyes narrowed, a hint of panic flickering there. She wasn't the carefree, confident woman I thought she was. She was scared, and in that moment, I felt a strange satisfaction. "You took what was mine," I said, leaning in close, "and now I'm taking what's left of him." She opened her mouth to speak, but I turned on my heel before she could get a word out. When I got back to my house, I sat at the kitchen table again. But this time, there was no wine, no need for it. I was sober, clear-headed, and more certain of my next move than I'd ever been in my life. It was over. The truth hit me like a slap across the face the moment I got home that day. When the door slammed behind me, I realized just how much I had lost. No, how much he had thrown away. My husband, the man I'd spent decades with, the one I thought I knew like the back of my hand, was now gone. And I had to accept that. No more bargaining with myself. No more hoping he would come to his senses. But the hardest part wasn't the betrayal. No, it was the realization that he had chosen her. There's a difference, you know, between the ones who are just there and the ones you choose to keep. He could have stayed with me. I had a lifetime of memories with him, a solid home, and a love that had been built on years of shared experiences. But instead, he chose her. The woman who wore too much perfume and didn't even have the decency to hide her intentions. I thought about how easily he had walked out that door, how easy it was for him to trade me in for something newer, something more exciting, something that would keep him from having to face his own aging. I had never been afraid of getting older. Hell, I welcomed it. Every line on my face told a story. Every wrinkle was a chapter of a life well lived. But John, he wasn't built for the slow pace of time. He didn't like the idea of getting old. And Jolene, well, she was the escape. She was the fantasy, the bright, shiny thing that promised to make him feel young again. But I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I used to be. I wasn't furious with him for leaving. I wasn't going to wallow in pity. That was a young woman's game, the one who thought she could change him, fix him, make it all okay again. I had made my choice too. And my choice was simple. I was going to take everything. John's car, the house, the savings, Everything we'd built together, I was going to take it and make it mine. I was done with being second in his life, done with living in the shadow of some fantasy woman, done with sacrificing everything I had for someone who couldn't see the worth of what was right in front of him. He had chosen her. Well, I had chosen me. The day I filed for divorce, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel joy or anger either. I just felt calm. It was the kind of calm you get after a storm, when the air is still and everything is clearer than it's ever been. John tried to call me, of course. He thought maybe if he said the right things, I'd cave. He thought maybe if he apologized enough, I'd let him come back, like all those other times when he had screwed up. But not this time. "Please, Nora," he said over the phone. "It's just a phase. I promise. I'll make things right. I'll come home. We'll fix it, I swear." I laughed at that. "You're right about one thing, John. This is a phase. And the phase where I beg you to come back? That's over." The lawyer called me the next day, telling me everything was moving smoothly. The papers were signed. The house, the assets, the retirement funds, everything was mine now. And just like that, I was free. John would never see a penny of it. He could go live his fantasy with Jolene, in that little house with the perfect lawn and her laugh that always seemed to carry just a bit too loud. Let him deal with her debt, her unpaid bills, and the reality that a pretty face doesn't hold up when the weight of the world comes crashing down. As for me, I was going to start over, on my own terms. The house felt too quiet now. It was the kind of silence that fills up the spaces where laughter once lived, the kind that takes over after years of shared memories and familiar routines. The bedroom was the hardest to face. His side of the bed was empty, but it wasn't just the absence of his body that haunted me. It was the presence, the small things, his worn slippers by the door, the half-finished books on the nightstand, the clothes still hanging in the closet like he was coming back tomorrow. I never realized how much stuff we accumulate in life until it's all packed into boxes, ready to be sold or donated. I started with his things, because that's what you do, right? You begin with what hurts the most, so the rest seems manageable. His jackets were still hanging where he left them, even though he hadn't worn them in years. I ran my fingers over the fabric, wondering how many times he'd put one on, buttoned it up, and walked out the door, leaving me behind, thinking he'd come back in time for dinner. But there was no coming back now. I packed the clothes into bags, tossing them out into the garage. I didn't even feel sad about it. It was like all those little symbols of him were no longer part of the equation. It was as if he had never really mattered. Or maybe, more honestly, I had stopped needing him to. Then there were the little mementos, the framed photographs from our family vacations, the tickets to concerts, the postcards from places we had visited. I took one of the pictures from our trip to Alaska, back when we were both young and still thought the world was full of endless possibilities. I studied the photo, me, smiling, and John beside me with his arm around my shoulders. I could see how happy we looked, how certain we were of our future. But I also saw the cracks, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, the way his hand lingered a little too long on my shoulder like he was trying to convince himself he was still happy. It hit me then, hard, like a punch to the gut. For years, I had been the one holding us together. I was the one who had kept the family afloat, who had cleaned up the messes, who had made sure we had what we needed. But I had never been enough. No matter how hard I tried, I wasn't her. I wasn't the new, the exciting, the younger model. I was the woman he'd grown complacent with, the woman who had loved him too deeply, too unquestioningly. And somewhere along the way, that love became a burden for him. I took down the pictures from the mantel and packed them up too. I put the frames in a box and shoved it into the corner of the closet, next to the bags of clothes. Maybe someday I would look at them again, maybe not. But for now, the silence was enough. I needed the space to fill it with something else, something that was just mine. The emptiness in the house wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. It wasn't the kind of emptiness that leaves you longing for what you lost. No, this emptiness felt like a blank slate. It was clean. It was mine. And that's when I realized something else. I was no longer the wife who had to wait. I was no longer the woman who bent herself out of shape to accommodate someone else's selfishness. I was done. By the time I finished clearing the last of his things out of the closet, it was late. The house was still and quiet. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, staring at the empty space. The bed was unmade, but the sheets were fresh, the pillowcases crisp. I could sleep in it now, without his presence beside me, without that dull ache of knowing I wasn't enough. I took a deep breath, the weight of the day lifting off me. Tomorrow would be the first day of my new life. I woke up to the sound of birds outside my window and the soft light of morning streaming through the blinds. It wasn't the same as before, the way John's snores used to rattle the walls, or the way he would drag himself out of bed, grumbling, and shuffle into the kitchen like it was just another day of his existence. But I didn't mind. I wasn't waking up to someone who didn't care anymore. I was waking up to me. The morning was still fresh, the air crisp. I felt a strange sense of power I hadn't had in years. Not the kind of power that comes from wealth or status. No, this was the power of choice. The power to live for myself again, without someone else's needs and desires controlling my every move. I poured myself a cup of coffee, black, just the way I liked it, and sat at the kitchen table. The sun was higher now, casting warm golden light across the room, but I didn't feel any rush to start the day. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the weight of responsibility hanging over my head. It was strange, really. The quietness of the house felt like a breath I had been holding for years, and now I was finally exhaling. I got to work on the things I had been putting off for far too long, sorting through my personal accounts, setting up new savings, thinking about what I wanted to do next. I had spent so much of my life thinking about what he wanted, what the family needed, that I had neglected the things that mattered to me. The little joys I used to have before life had swept me away into the chaos of marriage and children. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. The days started to fall into a new rhythm. I went out with friends more, revisited old hobbies, and even signed up for a ceramics class at the local community center. I was learning how to fill my life with things I loved, things that had nothing to do with keeping someone else happy. There was a part of me that still wanted to tell John about everything I was doing, just to see the jealousy or regret in his eyes. But I didn't. It was a passing thought, and I quickly dismissed it. The truth was, I didn't need his approval anymore. I didn't need him to know what I was up to. I was enough, just as I was. Jolene called once, a few days after the divorce papers were final. I didn't answer. I didn't even think about answering. I didn't owe her anything, and I certainly didn't owe her an explanation. I saw them around town a couple of times, John and Jolene. They looked right together. Too right, actually. Too perfect. Her laugh was louder than I remembered, and they always walked just a little too close to each other, like they were trying to prove something to the world. It wasn't my problem anymore. It wasn't even a thought in my head for long. I had my own life to live. In the evenings, I'd go out on the back porch with a glass of wine and watch the sun dip below the horizon. The house was quiet, and the only sound was the distant hum of traffic, far enough away to not feel intrusive. I found comfort in this silence, in the knowledge that I had survived. Not just survived, but thrived. I was finally living for myself. A month had passed, and it felt like I was breathing for the first time in years. The weight of John's absence wasn't so heavy anymore, and the silence that used to drown me now felt like an invitation. I started enjoying my mornings, my real mornings, not the half-sleep nights where I was waiting for him to come home and pretend everything was fine. I began to realize how much of my life had been spent on autopilot, doing what was expected, not what I truly wanted. Now, I was making my own decisions, and it felt exhilarating. I had always loved baking, pies, cakes, bread, but I hadn't made anything in years. It used to be my therapy. I'd stand in the kitchen, flour on my hands, lost in the rhythm of mixing and kneading. I pulled out my old recipe box one evening and decided I would bake a pie. Just for me. I made an apple pie with cinnamon and nutmeg that filled the house with a warmth I hadn't felt in ages. As I watched the crust turn golden in the oven, I realized I had forgotten how good it felt to do something just for the sake of doing it. No one was asking me to bake. No one was waiting for me to serve them. This time, I wasn't doing it for anyone but myself. That night, I sat on the porch with a piece of pie and a glass of red wine. The stars above me seemed to twinkle just a little brighter, like they were winking in approval. It had been so long since I felt this level of peace. I didn't have anyone telling me what to do, no one who needed me to be something I wasn't. I was exactly who I was supposed to be, finally. For the first time in ages, I smiled at myself in the mirror. I also started reconnecting with people, old friends, people I hadn't seen in years. There was a bar down the street where the regulars met every Friday, and I decided to go one evening. I had no expectations, really. I just wanted to sit somewhere that wasn't my own kitchen, somewhere that wasn't filled with reminders of the life I had lost. When I walked in, I wasn't sure what I expected, but what I didn't expect was the sense of freedom that came from being in a room full of strangers who didn't know my story. I ordered a gin and tonic, then another. A couple of the men at the bar glanced at me, but it wasn't the usual kind of glance, the one that's always looking for a way in, a way to make me feel small. No, this was different. This was a look of curiosity, of respect even. I wasn't the frumpy, neglected wife anymore. I was the woman who had walked away, and somehow that made me interesting. We talked about small things, music, movies, politics, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was talking again, really talking. I was no longer living in the shadow of a marriage that had drained me. I had reclaimed my space. A week later, I bumped into Jolene at the grocery store. I almost didn't recognize her at first. She looked different. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup immaculate, but there was something off about her. She had the same manic energy she always did, but this time it wasn't as charming. It felt desperate. Her smile was tight, strained, like she was holding her breath the entire time. "Nora," she said, her voice too high-pitched, almost too sweet. "How are you?" I looked at her for a moment. There was nothing in her that screamed friend, but there was a part of me that felt pity for her. Maybe it was the way she was holding herself, like she was pretending everything was fine, but the cracks were starting to show. Maybe it was the way she clung to that perfect exterior, as if she were trying to outrun something. "I'm good," I said, my voice calm, measured. Better than I thought I would be. She blinked, like she wasn't expecting me to say that. "I'm glad to hear it," she said quickly, pushing her cart forward, as if she needed to escape the conversation. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. For the first time, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't even resentful. I had taken back everything that was rightfully mine, and that included my peace of mind. John had made his choice, and now he was living with it. The same was true for Jolene. The world was a funny place, and I wasn't going to spend any more time trying to understand why people made the choices they did. I had my own life to build now. Weeks turned into months, and my life began to take shape in a way I hadn't anticipated. It was the kind of life I had dreamed of in bits and pieces over the years, but had never had the courage to chase. I had forgotten what it was like to be me, to be someone whose dreams weren't contingent on someone else's happiness. The house was quieter now, but in a good way. I didn't dread the silence anymore. I had filled the empty spaces with my own things, things that made me feel good. I rearranged the furniture, bought some new plants, added a few art pieces I had always wanted but never felt comfortable purchasing. The strangest part was that the more I let go of the life I'd once known, the lighter I became. Letting go of John, of the life we had built together, wasn't a loss. It was a release. I ran into John only a few more times after that, mostly in the grocery store or at the post office. Each time, he would try to engage in some kind of awkward conversation, as though we were still friends, or that I should be okay with him now. But I didn't need him anymore, and I wasn't about to pretend like I did. The last time I saw him, he looked smaller. Not physically, but emotionally. The man who had once seemed so full of confidence now looked deflated, worn out by the weight of his own decisions. I could see the strain in his eyes, the guilt, the regret, or maybe just the exhaustion of living in someone else's fantasy world. He tried to smile at me, but it was forced. The smile didn't reach his eyes. I smiled back, not out of kindness, but out of strength. "Hi, John," I said, my tone light, almost casual. I wanted to prove to him how unaffected I was. "How's everything going?" He shifted on his feet, glancing around like he was looking for an escape. Fine. You know, it's been a tough couple of months." I nodded. "I can imagine. Life's funny that way. You think you have everything figured out, and then it all changes." His face reddened slightly. He looked away, then back at me. "I'm sorry, Nora, I raised my hand, stopping him. "It's fine, John. No need for apologies. I'm good. Really. You should go. I'm sure Jolene's waiting for you." That was the last time I saw him. After that, I never saw the need to run into him. His life, his choices, none of it concerned me anymore. I had done the hard work of letting go, but now I was doing something even harder. I was learning to forgive myself. The guilt that had weighed me down for so long, the guilt of not being enough, of not being the perfect wife, had dissipated. It was a burden I had carried for far too long. The truth was, I had done everything I could for him, for us. And if he couldn't see that, it was no longer my problem. There were still moments when I felt a pang of loneliness, when I saw couples out on the town, laughing together, holding hands. But they didn't sting the way they once did. I no longer wished for what I had lost. I was beginning to see the possibility of something else, my own life, without the need for validation from someone else. I was learning that the love I had for myself was more than enough to fill the spaces that used to be occupied by someone else. One afternoon, I walked to the local park. I hadn't been there in ages, not since the kids were little. It felt like another lifetime, like someone else's memory. But the park was quiet, peaceful, the kind of place that offered no answers, but asked no questions either. I sat on a bench under an oak tree, watching the squirrels darting up the trunk, and I let myself simply be. No one needed anything from me in that moment, and I was okay with that. I thought about the past. I thought about all the years I had spent holding on to a man who never truly saw me for who I was. The truth was, I had been living for him and not for myself. I had been waiting for him to realize my worth, to recognize the woman I had always been. But I had forgotten the most important lesson of all. I didn't need him to do that. I needed me to see me. And so, in that quiet park, with the autumn leaves drifting around me, I finally let go. I let go of all the pain, the bitterness, the heartache. I let go of the memories that didn't serve me. I let go of the idea that my life could only be worthwhile with him in it. It wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. As the days went by, I found myself doing things I had never expected to do again. I started traveling, not far, just weekend trips to nearby towns, to places I had always wanted to visit, but never had the time for. I took up yoga at the local studio, and although I wasn't very flexible yet, I enjoyed the peace that came with each slow, deliberate movement. For the first time in years, I was focusing on my own health, my own peace. But one evening, just as I was settling into my newfound life, an unexpected visitor knocked on my door. It was Carol, my neighbor. We had always exchanged pleasantries over the years, nothing more than quick hellos, waves in the driveway, but I had never really gotten to know her. "Hi, Nora," she said, her voice sounding a bit uncertain, as though she wasn't quite sure what to say. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I didn't know what to expect. "Sure, come in," I said, stepping aside to let her in. She hesitated before walking in, her eyes darting around the house. There were no more pictures on the walls, no more traces of the life I had shared with John. Everything was neutral, clean, but there was an undeniable sense of me now. And Carol noticed it immediately. I've been meaning to come over for a while," she said, sitting down at the kitchen table, glancing at the fresh loaf of bread I had just pulled out of the oven. "I heard about your divorce, and I thought I should tell you something." I raised an eyebrow, my curiosity piqued. "What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath, as though gathering the courage to speak. "It's about John and Jolene." I hadn't seen either of them in weeks, and honestly, I hadn't thought much about them, but something in Carol's voice made me pause. "They're not happy," she said slowly, as if testing the waters. "I mean, I know they're together, but it's not what it seems. Not at all." I felt a flicker of something, sympathy, pity, but I pushed it aside. "Go on," I said, still unsure where this conversation was headed. Carol looked at me carefully before continuing, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I know things haven't been great between you and John, but you were right to walk away. Jolene, she's not who she pretended to be. I don't know how to put this, but I think she's been using him." I leaned forward, my interest now fully piqued. "Using him how?" "Well," Carol hesitated, glancing around again as if checking if anyone could overhear. "Jolene has been running up debts, big ones. She made him co-sign loans, even for things she didn't really need. And she's been, well, you know how she always had that perfect image? It's all a show. She's been hiding things from John, and now he's drowning in it." I listened quietly, taking in her words. I wasn't sure what to feel, honestly. Maybe some part of me expected something like this, but hearing it from someone else made it more real. John had always been so trusting, too trusting. He had never been one to question things, never been able to see beyond the surface of a situation. "But why are you telling me this?" I asked. "I don't need to know." Carol's eyes met mine. "Because I think you deserve to know. You deserve to hear it from someone who cares. He's a mess, Nora. He made a choice, but it wasn't the right one. and now he's stuck. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truth. I took a deep breath, letting the information settle in my chest. I didn't know if I should feel anything about it, but I didn't. Part of me had expected something like this to happen. Jolene had always seemed like she was living in a fantasy world, like she was playing at a life she didn't quite understand. Still, I didn't feel any vindication. It didn't change anything. It didn't make the pain of betrayal any less real. "Thank you for telling me, Carol," I said finally, my voice soft but firm. "But this doesn't change anything for me. I'm not going back to him." She nodded slowly, looking like she wasn't sure if she had expected me to say something different. "I know. I just thought you should know the truth. You deserve that." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I just looked at her, letting the silence linger. It wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't about her either. This was my life now, and I was the only one who had the power to shape it. After a few moments, Carol stood up. "Well, I'll let you get back to what you were doing. Just take care of yourself, Nora." "I will," I said, walking her to the door. As I closed the door behind her, I stood there for a moment, letting the reality of the conversation sink in. John's life was unraveling, and part of me wanted to feel some kind of satisfaction, but I didn't. I had learned that I couldn't find my peace in someone else's downfall. I had to keep moving forward. The truth was, I had already walked away. There was nothing left to go back to. The next few days were quiet. There were no more unexpected visits, no more lingering thoughts about John or Jolene. The house, now fully mine, had become my sanctuary, my space to grow, to rebuild, to truly breathe. Yet, something about that conversation with Carol stayed with me, lingering in the back of my mind. I didn't feel vindicated, but I didn't feel sorry for John either. What was the point? The damage was done, and whatever he had left to deal with, it was his problem now. But something else began to stir inside me. The more I thought about how John had left, about how everything had unraveled for him, I realized just how far I had come since that night I packed his things. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about growth. I had transformed. In the past, I had let myself be defined by my role as a wife, as a mother, as someone else's partner. I had given up pieces of myself for years, expecting that one day it would all be worth it. But now I was no longer living in the shadow of someone else's choices. I was learning to live for me. I started walking every morning, just around the block at first, feeling the fresh air on my skin, getting used to the idea of moving through the world on my own terms. Slowly, I built up my stamina. 1 block became 2, 2 became 4. Soon, I was exploring every corner of the neighborhood, enjoying the quiet rhythm of my footsteps on the pavement. It was funny how much I had missed the simple things, the things that John had never seemed to appreciate. Like how the wind felt on your face in the early morning, or how the birds sounded as the sun rose, or even the way the trees changed with the seasons. A quiet reminder that life was always moving forward. I began to feel stronger, physically and emotionally. I could feel the muscles in my legs becoming firmer, my chest opening as I filled my lungs with fresh air. I was alive, and that was something I had forgotten to feel for a long time. One afternoon, I received a call from my daughter, Jenna. She had been living out of state for a few years, and while we spoke often, it had been a while since we had seen each other in person. Her voice was warm on the other end of the line, filled with excitement. "Mom," she said, "I'm coming to town next weekend. I've got a few days off, and I want to spend them with you. I know it's been a while, but I'm really looking forward to it. I felt a wave of happiness wash over me. Jenna had always been my anchor, even when I hadn't realized it. The days when I felt most lost, it was her voice that kept me grounded. I hadn't seen her since the divorce, and the thought of spending time with her, just the two of us, made me feel like I was beginning a new chapter, a chapter that was all mine, but still deeply connected to those I loved. "I'm so glad you're coming," I said, my heart lifting. "I've missed you." As I hung up the phone, a thought crossed my mind. I was no longer defined by the broken pieces of my past. I was creating new connections, new memories. I wasn't just a woman who had been abandoned. I was a woman who was rebuilding, brick by brick. I wasn't doing this for John. I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I was doing it for me. The weekend Jenna came home, we spent hours talking, laughing, and reminiscing about old times. We went for long walks, explored new places in the town, and even went to the local flea market where we found trinkets we both loved. It felt so good to be able to focus on her, to enjoy her company without the weight of my past hanging over me. At one point, we sat down on a bench by the lake, watching the ducks swim lazily in the water. Jenna looked over at me, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Mom, I've been thinking," she said, her voice softer than usual. "You know, I'm really proud of you, for how you've handled everything. I can't imagine how hard it's been, but you've come through stronger than I've ever seen you." I looked at her, a smile tugging at my lips. "Thank you, sweetie, but I couldn't have done it without you. You're the one who helped me remember what really matters." She squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement of everything we had been through together. My daughter, the one person who had always believed in me, even when I couldn't believe in myself. The truth was, I didn't need John to validate me. I didn't need him to tell me I was enough. I had Jenna, and I had myself, and that, in itself, was enough. When Jenna left, I felt a sense of peace, not the kind of peace that comes from running away or avoiding the past, but the kind that comes from standing firm in who you are, regardless of what's happened before. I was finally building a life that belonged to me, a life that was free from the ghosts of past mistakes and unfulfilled promises. The road ahead wasn't always easy, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I was ready for whatever came next, because I knew one thing for sure. I was never going to let someone else define my worth again. I had everything I needed to move forward, and I wasn't looking back. It was strange the way things seemed to fall into place once I let go of the idea of needing anything. I used to believe that I had to hold on to everything, the house, the memories, the pieces of a life I'd once thought I wanted. But now I saw that the more I let go, the more free I became. For the first time, I was okay with being alone. Not lonely, but alone. It was a concept I'd never truly understood until recently. Before, the idea of solitude felt like a punishment, a void that needed to be filled. I had spent years thinking I wasn't enough unless someone else was there to validate my existence. And for so long, that someone had been John. But now, I had learned that solitude wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. The more I sat in the stillness, the more I realized how much space I had taken up in the world, physically and emotionally, without even realizing it. I had been a wife, a mother, a caregiver, but in doing all of that, I had lost me. I had become someone defined by others, by their needs, their wants, their expectations. Now, though, I wasn't just occupying space. I was choosing the space I took up, and it was mine. I found comfort in the mornings, in the stillness of the house before the world outside woke up. I'd wake up early, make coffee, sit on the porch with my feet up, and watch the world come to life. The trees in the backyard swayed gently in the morning breeze, the birds calling to each other in a chorus of soft melodies. I had no schedule to keep, no one's expectations to meet, just the slow, quiet rhythm of my own life. One afternoon I was at the market when I bumped into someone unexpected, Catherine, a woman I used to know back when John and I were still married. She was a friend of his, but we'd always been friendly enough, though I hadn't seen her in years. She looked a little surprised to see me, but she smiled when our eyes met. "Nora, it's been so long. How have you been?" I hadn't thought about Catherine in a long time. She had always been a bit distant when it came to our relationship, but I'd never held it against her. Life had a funny way of changing people, and I'd learned not to judge. "I'm doing well," I said, giving her a genuine smile. "Just getting back into the swing of things. How about you?" Catherine looked around nervously, and for a moment I wondered if she was going to ask about John, but she didn't. Instead, she looked me up and down, her gaze pausing for a moment on the way I held myself, straight-backed, confident. "You know, I've heard things," she said quietly, her voice dropping to a low tone, "about how things went between you and John. And well, I just wanted to say, I admire you for what you did." I raised an eyebrow. "You admire me?" She nodded slowly. "I never would have had the courage to do what you did. Walk away, I mean, especially with everything with everything that happened." I felt a strange, almost uncomfortable flutter in my chest, not because of the compliment, but because it made me realize that other people were seeing my strength, even if I wasn't fully aware of it myself. "I didn't have a choice," I said, my voice steady but low. It wasn't about courage. It was about surviving. There was a long pause before Catherine spoke again. "I can't imagine what it was like for you, Nora. I mean, you were so together for so long, always doing everything for everyone. You made it look so easy." I smiled softly. "Nothing was easy. I just learned how to hide it." She nodded, a look of understanding in her eyes. "Well, I just wanted to say that you're stronger than anyone I know, and I think you'll be okay." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I had never been one to seek validation from others, but Catherine's words meant something. They reminded me that my journey was something that could be seen, even from the outside. Maybe I was stronger than I gave myself credit for. Maybe I had always been. That evening, I sat by the window in my living room, watching the sky turn to dusk. The reflection of the trees in the glass looked almost like a painting. My mind wandered back to that conversation with Catherine. Stronger than I know. It was a simple phrase, but it held so much weight. I had spent so long thinking I wasn't strong enough to stand on my own, that I was only capable of being someone else's partner, someone's support. But now, as I sat alone in the quiet of my home, I realized something. I was stronger than I had ever known. Maybe it wasn't about being strong all the time. Maybe strength came in different forms. Maybe real strength was the ability to let go, to trust yourself enough to take that first step into the unknown. And maybe real strength was living through the hardest moments and still choosing to move forward. The next morning I woke up with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't clinging to the past anymore. I wasn't waiting for validation from John or anyone else. I was living for me, and that was enough. I walked through my house, noticing how the light filtered through the windows and bathed the rooms in a soft glow. It felt like a reflection of what was happening inside me. For the first time, I felt truly at home. It's funny how life works. I used to believe that freedom was something external, that it was about escaping, running away, getting out of situations that were suffocating. But now I realized it was the exact opposite. True freedom wasn't about escaping my past. It was about embracing it, acknowledging the mistakes, the heartbreak, and the lessons, and choosing to build something new, something that was entirely mine. That realization came to me on a bright Saturday morning when I decided to take a drive. I had no particular destination in mind, just the open road and the feeling that I needed to move. I took a route that wound through the hills outside town, the trees standing tall and proud on either side of the narrow road. I didn't put on music at first. I wanted to listen to the sound of my own thoughts, to clear my head. And as I drove, I let myself think about everything, the past, the present, and the uncertain future. I thought about John. I thought about the person I had been when we were together, the wife, the caretaker, the one who always tried to please, to hold everything together. And then I thought about who I was now, a woman who was learning to take up space, a woman who no longer needed validation from anyone. The freedom in that realization was overwhelming. I drove for hours, just letting the miles stretch out in front of me, not caring about where I was going. I had no itinerary, no obligations. I stopped at small towns, got coffee in quiet diners, and walked along quiet streets, savoring the solitude. At one point, I stopped at a park and sat on a bench under a big oak tree. I watched children running through the grass, their laughter ringing in the air. I wondered how long it had been since I'd felt that carefree, that light. And then it hit me. I could be that free again. I had allowed myself to believe that my worth was tied to my marriage, my role as a wife, and then as someone who was left behind. But I was more than that. I was a whole person, capable of creating a life that was fulfilling all on my own. I didn't need a man to complete me. I didn't need anyone to define my worth. When I got back home, I felt lighter, more grounded in myself. I realized that I had been looking for external things, for other people's approval, to give me the sense of belonging I needed. But the truth was, the only approval I needed was my own. Over the next few weeks, I started doing more things for myself. I signed up for a painting class at the local community center, something I had always wanted to do but had never made the time for. I found joy in creating something just for the sake of creation. No deadlines, no expectations, just color and form and the pure pleasure of making something that reflected how I felt. I took weekend trips to nearby cities, exploring new art galleries and quaint little bookstores. I met people, interesting, passionate people who had their own stories to tell. I didn't feel the need to fill any of these experiences with expectations. I was content with simply living in the moment, enjoying the world around me. And then, one day, something unexpected happened. I was at the park again, sitting on a bench just enjoying the peace, when I noticed a familiar face walking by. It was Carol, my neighbor from a few months ago. She was alone, walking at a slow pace, and when she saw me, she waved. "Hey, Nora, how are you doing?" she called out. I stood up, smiling as she walked over to me. It had been a while since we'd talked, but I remembered our conversation about John and Jolene. "I'm doing great," I said, feeling the weight of those words more than ever. "Really great." She raised an eyebrow, giving me an appraising look. "You know, I've been hearing a lot of things about how you've been doing lately. People are noticing." I wasn't sure what she meant by that, but I didn't care. The past didn't define me anymore. It had simply shaped who I was, and now I was choosing my own path. "People talk," I said, shrugging. "It doesn't matter. I'm good. I'm at peace with where I am." Carol looked at me for a moment, as if considering my words. Then she nodded, her smile soft and understanding. I can see that. You've changed, Nora, but for the better. You seem different, in a good way. I smiled back, feeling a sense of gratitude for this quiet moment, this simple exchange. I've learned a lot over the past year, and I think I finally get it. Life doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be mine. Carol nodded again, her gaze lingering on me for a moment longer. Then, without another word, she turned and continued on her walk. As I sat back down on the bench, I couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. Carol's words, though simple, carried weight. It wasn't just the people around me who were noticing the change. It was me. I was noticing myself. That evening, I sat at my dining room table, sipping a glass of wine, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. My life, which had once seemed so tangled and broken, had finally unraveled into something beautiful and whole. I had walked away from a life that was no longer serving me, and in doing so, I had discovered a version of myself I never knew existed. I wasn't just healing anymore. I was thriving. It had been months since I had truly thought about John, and even longer since I had heard from him. I had no interest in rekindling anything with him, but there was a part of me that still wondered how he was doing. Was he happy? Was he regretting his decisions? Did he ever miss the life we had built together? I couldn't lie and say there wasn't a lingering curiosity, a small knot in my stomach every time I thought about him. But it wasn't pain that came with that feeling. No, it was more of a reflection, an acknowledgement of what had been, and a quiet understanding that I had moved beyond it. One evening, I decided to call my old friend Ruth, who I hadn't spoken to in a while. Ruth was a no-nonsense kind of woman, the type who didn't sugarcoat things, and I always appreciated that about her. We'd known each other since our kids were in preschool together, and though we drifted apart a bit after my marriage had soured, I always knew I could turn to her when I needed a real conversation. "Ruth, it's been too long," I said as she picked up the phone. "How are you?" "Nora," she said, her voice warm with familiarity. "I've been good, just staying busy. How about you? I heard some things. Some good things, I hope." I laughed softly. "I'm good, really good, actually. I'm finally myself again, Ruth." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a soft sigh. "I'm glad to hear that. You know, I've always known you were strong, but I think you're stronger than even you realize. I can't imagine how hard it's been, but I'm proud of you." Her words meant more than I cared to admit. Ruth was one of the few people who truly understood the weight of what I had gone through, and hearing her affirm that I was doing the right thing made me feel even more confident in my choices. "You know, it hasn't been easy, but I've learned that I can't keep looking back at what was. I need to look at what is, what's in front of me, and what I can build from here. And for the first time in a long time, I feel free." She laughed softly. "That's exactly it, Nora. You're free. And it's such a beautiful thing to see." We chatted for a while longer, talking about everything from the weather to our kids' latest updates. But eventually, the conversation turned to something I hadn't expected. "So, I don't know if you've heard," Ruth began, her voice dropping a little, "but John came by the other day." I felt a strange tightness in my chest at the mention of his name, but I quickly pushed it aside. "Really?" I asked, though I tried not to sound too curious. "What did he want?" Ruth hesitated before answering. "He wanted to talk about you, about everything that happened. He seemed, well, a bit lost, to be honest. He didn't really go into specifics, but I could tell he was regretful. He didn't exactly say it, but you could feel it. And you know what? He looked awful, Nora. Like really awful. Not the man I remember. I felt a strange mix of emotions rise within me. Sympathy, maybe, but mostly indifference. Did he say anything else? I asked, my voice steady. I wasn't sure why I wanted to know, but something in me just needed to hear it. Well, he asked about you, Ruth continued. Said he hoped you were doing okay, that he still thought about you sometimes. But you could tell it was different. The way he said it wasn't the same. He seemed almost defeated. I felt a flicker of something, a memory of the man I had once loved, the man I had stood beside for years. But that feeling quickly faded, replaced by a clearer, stronger sense of reality. I wasn't that woman anymore, the one who lived in the shadows of his mistakes. Thank you for telling me, I said softly, though there was no emotion behind the words. But honestly, Ruth, I'm not interested in going back to that. I know, Ruth replied, her voice kind. I just thought you should know. You've come so far, and I think he sees that. But you've done what you needed to do, Nora. You're not the same woman you were, and that's a good thing. The truth was, hearing that John had come around, that he was regretful, didn't bring up the feelings I thought it might. It didn't hurt. It didn't make me feel like I was missing something. If anything, it solidified the fact that I had made the right choice. I'm proud of you, Ruth said, her words wrapping around me like a warm blanket. And I think you'll find someone who really deserves you, someone who sees you for who you are, not who you were. I let out a soft breath, feeling a mixture of peace and excitement settle inside me. Maybe. But for now, I'm good on my own. I'm doing exactly what I need to do. For me. The next few days passed quietly, filled with small moments of reflection and growth. I didn't need John's regret, or anyone else's validation, to move forward. I was already moving. I had been for months now. I had learned to love myself in ways I hadn't known were possible. And in doing so, I had discovered something else. I was open to love again, but it would be a love that was on my own terms. It was a crisp, late autumn afternoon when I had that moment. The kind of quiet moment that sneaks up on you when you least expect it, when you feel the weight of everything that's happened, and yet, in that weight, you find a sense of peace. It was as though a new layer of my life had formed, something light but solid, and I could feel it in every breath I took. I had spent the past few months focusing entirely on myself, on learning what it meant to be alone without being lonely. I had discovered hobbies I never knew I loved. I'd forged connections with people who shared my passions, and I had explored parts of my town I hadn't bothered to see in years. But more than anything, I was rediscovering joy. Simple, uncomplicated joy. One Saturday afternoon, I walked to the local farmers market, a place I used to love before the weight of marriage had kept me tied down to routines and obligations. I had always enjoyed the colors, the smells, the sense of community in the air. The market was small, but it had its charm. Old wooden stalls with fresh produce, handmade soaps, and locally crafted jewelry. People moved through it slowly, stopping to chat with the vendors, savoring the small-town atmosphere. I bought some fresh bread and a bouquet of flowers, my small act of celebration for the day. There was no special reason for it. I simply felt alive, and that was enough. As I walked down the cobblestone streets, the sun casting long shadows on the ground, I realized that it was the first time in a long time that I didn't feel weighed down by anything. There was a lightness in me, like a new skin had grown over the old, one that was strong and resilient, yet soft and flexible. I had shed the identity of a wife, a mother, a caretaker, and I had uncovered the core of who I really was, who I had always been underneath it all. That evening I sat in the cozy corner of my living room with a glass of wine, the flowers from the market sitting on the table in front of me, their vibrant colors catching the light from the lamp beside them. I turned on some music, something soft, classical, with a touch of melancholy. It had become my new ritual to sit with the music, allowing it to fill the space around me, filling me with a sense of purpose, a sense of calm. I let the music wash over me as I flipped through a book I had been meaning to read. But as I looked at the words on the page, I found myself distracted by something else, a thought, a feeling that had been building in the back of my mind for some time. I'm ready. Ready for what? It wasn't about needing someone else. It wasn't about filling some kind of gap in my life. But it was a quiet, deep knowing that I was ready to let someone into this new world I had built. I wasn't just open to love again. I was ready to embrace it, on my own terms, in my own time. The idea didn't scare me anymore. For a long time, I had convinced myself that love was something that required sacrifice, compromise, and pain. But now I knew that love could be something gentle, something that complemented the life I had built for myself, rather than something that threatened to unravel it. I wasn't looking for a savior. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me. I had already done that for myself. What I was ready for was someone who could stand beside me, someone who could celebrate this new chapter in my life, someone who could walk with me, not ahead of me or behind me. The next day, I met Carol for coffee at the local cafe. It was one of those places with worn wooden floors, vintage furniture, and the kind of atmosphere that made you want to linger. Carol and I had grown closer over the past few months. She had become a steady presence in my life, someone I could confide in without fear of judgment. We sat at a small table near the window, sipping our drinks, chatting about everything and nothing at all. As we talked, Carol's eyes kept flicking to me, a strange look on her face. "What?" I asked, laughing a little. She smiled. "You've changed, you know. I don't think you even realize how much." I raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "Not just in the way you look, though I'll admit, you do look different, healthier, lighter, but in the way you carry yourself. You're not the same woman who walked out of that house months ago. You're—" She paused, trying to find the right words. "You're alive, Nora. I mean really alive." A warmth spread through me at her words. I hadn't even realized it, but she was right. It was as though I had been walking through life in a fog for so long, and now I could finally see the world in sharp focus again. Everything seemed brighter, more vivid, like a new lens had been placed over the entire world, and I could finally take it all in, fully. "I think I am," I said, smiling to myself. "For the first time, I feel like I'm really here, really living." Carol nodded, as if she had known that before I even did. "You deserve this, Nora. You've been through so much, and you've come out the other side stronger than anyone I know." I took a sip of my coffee, feeling the weight of her words sink in. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but I had made it through the storm, and now I was finding my way toward calm. Later that week, I received a letter. It wasn't unexpected, but it still caught me off guard. It was from John. I opened it slowly, my fingers trembling just a bit as I unfolded the piece of paper. His handwriting was the same as it always had been, neat and deliberate. "Nora, I know this letter might seem out of the blue, but I've thought about reaching out to you for a while. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. I've made a lot of mistakes. And I know I hurt you in ways I can never undo. But I've learned some things too. About myself. About who I was when we were together. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I see what I've done, and I regret it deeply. I hope you're finding peace, and I hope you know that I'm thinking of you. John. I put the letter down carefully, letting it sit on the table before me. I didn't feel angry or sad. In fact, I didn't feel much of anything at all. It was just a letter, words, a gesture perhaps, but one that no longer had any power over me. I folded the letter back up and placed it in the drawer where I kept old mementos. I didn't need to keep it, but I also didn't need to throw it away. It was just another chapter in the book of my life, one that I had closed, content to leave it behind. And with that, I understood that love, true love, didn't need to be dramatic or grand. It didn't need to come with apologies or declarations. It just needed to be real. And for the first time in my life, I was in a place where I could love myself enough to invite it in, on my own terms. It was a quiet Sunday morning when it happened. The kind of morning that makes you want to stay in your pajamas all day, sip coffee, and let the hours drift by without any particular purpose. I had just finished a book I'd been meaning to read for months and was about to start on a puzzle when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the sudden interruption startled me. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was a package or maybe a neighbor stopping by for something trivial. But then I heard a familiar voice from the other side of the door. "Nora, it's me, John." My heart skipped a beat, but I quickly steadied myself. John. After months of silence, of putting his memory into a neat little box in the back of my mind, he had found his way back into my life. I stood still for a moment, unsure of how to react. The old part of me, the part that wanted to be the perfect wife, wanted to rush to the door to make everything okay again. But the new version of me, stronger, more independent and wiser, held me in place. I took a deep breath and opened the door slowly. John was standing there looking older, more worn than I remembered. His hair was graying at the temples, and there was a tiredness to his eyes that hadn't been there before. He shifted awkwardly on the porch, not quite knowing how to begin. "Hi," he said quietly, almost as if he were unsure of how to approach me. "I didn't mean to drop by unannounced, but I needed to talk to you." I studied him for a moment. He looked like a man who had been through his own battles, though they were different from mine. His clothes were simple, faded jeans and a worn jacket. His demeanor was subdued, as though the arrogance he once carried had been stripped away. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. I wasn't sure why I invited him in. Maybe I was curious about what he had to say, or maybe I was just tired of avoiding the past. John stepped inside, and we both awkwardly settled into the living room. The silence hung between us for a long time before he finally spoke again. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, Nora," he began, his voice almost too soft. "But I've been thinking a lot about everything, about the way things ended, the way I treated you. I know I hurt you, and I'll never be able to undo that." I sat back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. I was calm, though there was still a trace of that old hurt lurking beneath the surface. But I wasn't angry, not anymore. I had let go of that anger months ago, and I wasn't going to let him take it from me again. "Why now?" I asked, my voice steady. "Why come here after all this time? Why not just leave things the way they are?" He looked down, avoiding my gaze for a moment before answering. "Because I can't move forward, Nora. I can't live with myself until I've told you how sorry I am. For everything. for betraying you, for all the lies. I wasn't a good husband. I wasn't even a decent man. I had heard these words before, in different forms from different people. Apologies were easy to give when you wanted something, when you were trying to ease your own conscience. But in his eyes, I saw something different, a genuine remorse, even if it was too late. I've been living with regret, and I know it doesn't change anything, he continued, his voice breaking slightly. But I needed you to know that I'm not the same man I was back then. I've lost everything, and I've had to rebuild. And the truth is, I don't even know where to start. I took a slow breath, processing his words. There was a part of me that wanted to feel something, anger, sadness, maybe even relief. But there was nothing, just a quiet understanding that this moment was one of closure, not reconciliation. You didn't just lose everything, John, I said softly, meeting his eyes. You destroyed it. You threw away everything we had, everything we built, and in doing that, you lost me. Not because I'm holding on to some old grudge, but because I finally saw the truth. You didn't value me, not in the way I deserved. He nodded slowly, as if he had expected that response. I know. I didn't know how good I had it until it was gone. And now, I'm paying the price. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I see it all now. I stood up, walking over to the window and looking outside. The trees were bare, their branches stretching into the sky like dark fingers. It was a fitting metaphor for how I felt, vulnerable but strong. I had endured the storm, and now I was standing tall. John, I said, turning to face him, I've already forgiven you. Not for you, but for me. Holding on to anger and resentment doesn't do anything but weigh me down. But that doesn't mean we're going to be anything other than strangers. I've built a life for myself, a life that doesn't include you, and that's okay. There was a long pause as he looked at me, his face a mixture of relief and sorrow. I understand, he said quietly. I didn't expect anything else. He stood up, and for a moment, we just stood there. Two people who once shared a life, now separated by time and circumstance. It wasn't a painful parting, but it was a final one. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Goodbye, John, I said softly, my voice steady. Take care of yourself. He nodded, walking to the door without another word. As I watched him leave, I realized something important. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. No apologies, no grand gestures, no emotional upheaval. I had closed that chapter, not with bitterness, but with a quiet acceptance of what had been. And with that, the door closed, and a new chapter of my life began. The one I was writing, one word at a time. The days following John's visit felt like a slow exhale. I had lived for so long carrying the weight of that relationship, the memories, the mistakes, the regrets, that when the door closed behind him, it felt as though I had dropped a boulder from my chest. The air around me was lighter. It wasn't just the absence of him, but the absence of the emotional baggage that had come with him. I was free, really free. It took me a while to realize just how much I had been carrying, not just because of him, but because of the life I had built for so many years, the life I thought was everything I needed. When he left, so much of that idea of what was slipped away too. The life I had imagined for myself had already changed. It was in the small things, my morning routines, the way I spoke to myself in the mirror, the books I started reading. All of it was slowly transforming into something new. It wasn't that I didn't miss certain aspects of the life we had shared. The companionship, the comfort of familiarity. But I had learned, in the most painful way, that true comfort doesn't come from dependence. It comes from self-reliance. I was learning to enjoy my own company again, finding peace in the quiet moments of solitude. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, fully. The weekends became my sacred time, the days where I did whatever I wanted, without explanation or guilt. One Saturday, I found myself standing in front of a tiny, unassuming pottery studio on the corner of Main Street. It was a little shop I had always walked past but never really paid attention to. Something about it called to me that day. I pushed open the door, the bell above it jingling softly. The inside was warm and inviting, with the faint smell of clay and wood. There were pieces of pottery everywhere, bowls, vases, cups, each one unique, handcrafted with care. A woman in her late 40s looked up from the wheel and smiled. "Can I help you?" she asked, wiping her hands on a towel. "I've never tried this before," I said, my voice uncertain, though a part of me felt excited. "I've always wanted to, though." She raised an eyebrow. "Well, you've come to the right place. It's a little messy, but it's a lot of fun. Why don't you give it a shot?" I hesitated for a moment, but then something inside me, something that had been dormant for far too long, whispered, "Why not?" A half-hour later, I was covered in clay, laughing at the mess I'd made. My hands were caked with it, my apron was streaked, and I had only managed to form a lopsided bowl. But in that moment, I didn't care. I was laughing. I was alive. The sensation of the cool clay beneath my fingers, the quiet of the studio, and the sense of accomplishment that came from creating something with my own hands. It all felt like a tiny act of rebellion against the life I had known. "Not bad for a first try," the woman said, eyeing my wobbly bowl. "I think it'll be a work in progress," I replied, wiping my hands on a towel. "But I'll be back. This is therapeutic." She grinned. "You'll get hooked. Pottery has a way of doing that." Later that evening, I sat in the small cafe I frequented, a warm mug of tea in hand, watching the world go by. I had come to love these solitary moments. They were mine, uninterrupted, and they allowed me to process, to reflect. As I stared out the window, my thoughts drifted back to John's visit. I hadn't thought about him much after that day, but a few images lingered in my mind. His tired eyes, the way his voice cracked when he spoke of regret. I had heard all the right words, and yet none of it mattered anymore. He had apologized. He had owned up to his mistakes. But none of that changed the reality of what had happened. He wasn't coming back, and I wasn't waiting for him to. In the quiet of that moment, I realized something that surprised me. I no longer needed him to be sorry. It wasn't because I was bitter. It was because I had learned something more important, the value of my own peace. I had forgiven him, not for him, but for me. And I didn't need a sorry to move on. What I needed was to keep moving forward. The following weeks were filled with small victories. The pottery classes became a regular part of my routine, something I looked forward to every week. I started making more of my own decisions, on everything from where I traveled to what kind of food I ate. There was no pressure, no expectations, no one to answer to except myself. One afternoon, I received a call from Ruth. "Nora, I'm so glad I caught you. I've got some exciting news," she said, her voice full of energy. "What's going on?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "You remember that gallery downtown? The one that always has those art shows? They're having a special exhibit next month, and they want to showcase some of the pottery I've been working on, and they're asking if you'd want to show some of your pieces too. You've got such talent, Nora. I think it would be a perfect fit." I felt a rush of excitement, quickly followed by a twinge of nerves. "You really think so?" "Absolutely. You've got a knack for it. It's time you showed the world what you're capable of." I sat for a moment, considering her words. A gallery show? A dream that I had never thought possible just months ago was suddenly within reach. "Okay," I said, my voice steady but full of possibility. "Let's do it." For the first time in a long time, I felt as though I was creating something that was entirely mine. The pieces I made in the pottery studio became extensions of my own journey, imperfect, yes, but beautiful in their authenticity. I was no longer the woman who had been tied down by someone else's choices. I was the woman who was building a life from scratch, one choice at a time. The gallery show was a turning point, a symbol of everything I had overcome. It wasn't just about the art. It was about the courage it took to step into the light again, to believe in myself, and to embrace the beauty of a new beginning. The night of the gallery show arrived sooner than I expected. I stood in front of my pieces, taking in the quiet hum of conversation around me, the clink of wine glasses, the soft shuffle of people moving from one display to the next. The lights overhead were warm, casting a golden glow over my pottery, making it seem as though each piece had its own quiet story to tell. I could hear Ruth's voice in the background, introducing my work to some of the guests, her pride in me evident. She had been right. I had no idea how much I needed this, needed to step into the world and finally be seen, not as a wife, a mother, or a woman defined by the past, but as myself. Just myself. The gallery was small, but there was something magical about the way the pieces fit together in that space. The other artists had their own displays, each one unique, filled with color and life. But when I looked at my work, I saw not just the pottery itself, but the journey that had led me here, the quiet nights spent learning, the mistakes made, the moments of self-doubt, and the final acceptance of my own worth. A man approached my table, looking at my pieces with genuine curiosity. I smiled, stepping forward to introduce myself. "These are beautiful," he said, his voice rich with admiration. "I can see the care and thought in every piece. Tell me about your process." It was a simple question, but it brought a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that someone appreciated my work, not just for its appearance, but for the feeling behind it. "I started a few months ago," I said, feeling the warmth of my own voice as I spoke about my pottery. It wasn't planned, but I needed something to do, something just for me. And as I worked, I started to see how much it reflected my own life, how it's not about perfection, but about making something real, something that has meaning, even if it's flawed. He nodded thoughtfully. "That's the heart of true art. It's not about the end result, it's about the journey. I can see that in your work. There's a depth to it." His words echoed in my mind long after he had moved on. It's not about the end result, it's about the journey. The truth of those words struck me like a bell ringing in the quiet of my heart. I wasn't the same person I was a year ago, or even 6 months ago. The journey I had taken wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and it had led me to a place of strength and peace that I hadn't known was possible. Later in the evening, as I was making my way through the crowd, I caught a familiar figure standing by the door. Carol. She had come to support me, of course, and the pride in her eyes as she spotted me was unmistakable. She waved me over, a huge grin on her face. "I knew you had it in you, Nora. These pieces, they're amazing." "Thank you," I said, my heart full. "I still can't believe I'm here. It feels surreal." "It's not surreal, it's real. You earned this. Look at you, shining. You're alive again, and it shows in everything you do." I laughed, my heart swelling with gratitude. "I think I'm starting to believe that." We stood there for a few moments, letting the sounds of the gallery wash over us. For the first time, I wasn't focused on the past or the people who had left it behind. I wasn't concerned with the failures or the hurts. I was present, fully, and that was enough. As the night wound down, the crowd began to thin, leaving behind a sense of quiet satisfaction in the air. I glanced over at my pottery one last time, taking in the soft glow of the lights reflecting off the glazed surfaces. There was a finality to it, but it wasn't an end, it was a beginning. I had shown the world who I was now. I had shared my vulnerability, my growth, and my art. And in return, the world had given me something in return, a sense of belonging, not to anyone or anything specific, but to myself. I wasn't defined by the past, by John, by anyone but me. I took a deep breath as I stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights twinkling softly around me. Carol stood beside me, her arm linked with mine as we walked down the street together. "So," she said with a mischievous grin, "what's next for Nora?" I looked up at the stars, feeling the weight of the question in my chest. I didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't searching for them. "I don't know yet," I said, a smile tugging at my lips, "but I'm ready for whatever comes."